Welcome back to the channel. I have a fun video for you today. This is a very different style of video, but I was inspired by a comment I saw a couple of videos ago where someone suggested that we do a review of some of the most common meta decks in the format, because we often kind of gloss over those or say, oh, this person's playing the stock list of whatever. And it occurs to me that many people probably don't play that much Canadian Highlander, or maybe even decks that are stock and are kind of common for people who are very enfranchised are maybe still novel or not entirely clear for people who are maybe newer to the format. So I wanted to create this video both as something that we can reference back to and also as a resource for new players. And then additionally, I am going to put in this video some insights that are a little bit more detailed too for people who are a bit more enfranchised. So what I'm going to do is I've pulled out, I think, 9 meta decks. These are decks that are in no particular order. I'm going to go over them in terms of where they sit on the band from combo to control, and sort of putting combo on one side and control on the other side. And we're going to review them one at a time. I'm going to talk about the basic structure, how they work, and what metagames they're well positioned into and why people choose to play them. And without further ado, I will throw to the first deck. I hope you enjoy this style of video. If you have any other decks that you hear people referring to as common or meta that you maybe don't know enough about, feel free to comment them down below. I'm happy to do a part 2 of this style video where I go over maybe 8 or 9 more decks. Obviously, Canadian Highlander, 100 card singleton format, there is a lot of things that you can be doing in this format, and the ones that I've chosen here are things that are powerful now that I think are going to be powerful going into the future as well. I tried to kind of future-proof this video as much as possible so that I'm not in 1 year being like, wow, 6 of the decks I showcased were bad or are bad now. But yeah, I think it'll be okay. So without further ado, I'll kick it over to the first deck. Okay, so getting into it first, we have Citadel Storm, and I want to give a shout out before I begin that this, to another Moxfield account. I know I often shout out various Canadian Highlander Moxfield accounts, but this is one that I think is particularly relevant for this context. This is the Canadian Highlander database. This is maintained by the community. So essentially what this is it is a database of decks that are kind of like established. They've been played by multiple people in multiple events, or in some cases they're like established meta staples. And this is a Moxfield that features basically stock-ish lists that are maintained by players who are known for playing that deck. So this is a place where you can come if you are newer to the format, or if you're just looking to get into a deck for the first time. There are really a ton of decks here that you can look at and get a kind of sense of like a good starting off point. The lists here are always going to be totally fine, probably within 10 cards of what most people are winning tournaments with, and there's a pretty wide assortment of lists here. And you know, like, fun fact, I am like one of the maintainers here on the high tech deck. So it's things like that. It's people who are known for or really enjoy playing certain archetypes are the maintainers for these, and as a result, you really get a pretty up-to-date version. So without further ado, let's start on the farthest side over on the combo sphere. So this is Citadel Storm. You've heard us talk about it a bunch. We've played it against it a bunch. I've played it on the channel once. This is a deck that is newer to the Canadian Highlander format, even though it technically could have existed for longer. And the basis of this deck is pretty simple. This is the Tinker deck. So what this deck is trying to do is find Tinker through one of a wide variety of ways. You'll notice there are a ton of tutors here, like Dark Petition, Beseech the Mirror, Demonic Council, Solve the Equation. Profane Tutor is a really powerful one for reasons I'll showcase in a second. Personal Tutor, like, you're going really, really deep here. Is Imperial Seal in this list still? No, okay, but you're going really deep here trying to find Tinker, and what you are tinkering for is Boros Citadel. So this is an interaction that gets played in other formats as well. Obviously, Boros Citadel is a very good storm enabler. Basically, if you can keep the top of your deck free of lands, you can oftentimes cast your whole library. So that's what this deck is trying to do. So it's enabled by tutors, obviously a decent size package of artifacts so that you have something to sacrifice to the Tinker. And then once you have the Boros Citadel in play, you can do a couple of different things. One, you can just try and win fairly by like flipping a bunch of things and eventually finding your Tendrils of Agony. But more realistically, this deck is often winning by doing something more unfair than that, actually. So there's a couple of avenues that basically instantly win the game. Thought Lash, if you assemble Thought Lash plus Boros Citadel, this allows you to just clear off the top of your deck whenever there's a land and a spell that you don't want even, so you can just Thought Lash, clear off what you need, what you don't need, and ultimately win the game. Additionally, if you can assemble Boros Citadel plus Aetherflux Reservoir, this is pretty hard to lose with. Obviously, you can brick if you hit too many lands in a row, but the Aetherflux Reservoir essentially makes it so that the life loss cost of Boros Citadel is not existent. So this is another pretty clean way to win the game. Similarly, Sensei's Divining Top plus Boros Citadel allows you to draw your deck. And more importantly, for the sake of storming off with Citadel, this allows you to clear off lands really effectively as well, which is very important. And then this list is also playing some kind of fun ways to gain a little bit more life, because it can be the difference between being able to go off and not. So like Sunset Revelry is kind of a funny one. This deck has Weather the Storm, which is awesome if you've like, Boros Citadel 4 or 5 spells, and then you just get to gain like 18 life and continue to go off. Obviously, that's very powerful. And this deck has played Timely Reinforcements before. Obviously, it doesn't anymore, but that's the kind of effect that you're playing. So this deck does have some B plans, but it really is like very in on finding Tinker. You can technically assemble Yawgmoth's Will combo kills, so it is possible to put together like Dark Ritual, Cabal Ritual, you have Lion's Eye Diamond. You can just generate enough mana to win the game with some kind of Will combo. Getting to, 9 or 10 Storm naturally in this deck is not trivially easy, but it is doable. It's definitely possible, and it's not... the Yawgmoth's Will is in this deck for a reason, right? Like it can recur Tinker or other things, but it also is just there because it enables you to win the game. This deck is also playing Doomsday, and the Yawg Will, I believe, is there as part of the Doomsday package as well. Doomsday is a nice one because if you have Boros Citadel going, Doomsday just lets you win the game. You could put 5 cards on the top of your deck that result in you winning the game ultimately when you get to cast them for free. No card draw required, no mana required. You just cast the Doomsday, win the game. Additionally, I believe that there is a Doomsday kill in this package. Yeah, so you can also set up like a Will Storm Doomsday kill as well, which is pretty impressive. It's nice to have another avenue to win the game, and obviously this deck is already playing a ton of tutors and ways to find Tinker, so setting up a combo where you can find Doomsday is going to work just fine as well. This is the farthest extreme on the combo side. This deck is very fast. It has no non-combo B plans, so you're not ever winning the game with something remotely fair. There's no random creature beats. There's no planeswalker you might accidentally ultimate. There's nothing like that. You are winning the game with a combo, and this deck, and the reason why I started with this deck, is, I believe, the fastest in the format. If you just are looking to play something that is going to present lethal as quickly as possible, this is definitely the deck for you. In terms of interaction, there's not a lot, although there is a little bit. You've got the discard spells, so Inquisition, Dreadfugue, Duress, and Thoughtseize are the 4 ones that we're reaching for here. And then additionally, you've got Silence and Orum's Chant. And outside of that, you're not playing any kind of interaction on the stack. You've also got Into the Floodmaw, Static Prison, and Swords to Plowshares as ways to interact with things on the board, potential Hate Bears, or cards like Grafdigger's Cage, which do just lock you out from winning the game as long as they stay on the battlefield. So you want to have a couple of answers to those in your deck. And then as far as the points go, this deck is very focused on tutors, and in particular playing cheap tutors. So you've got Imp Seal, Mystical Tutor, Vampiric Tutor, and Tainted Pact as kind of cheap ways to try and find Tinker. And then you've got Mana Vault, because it's just too good not to play, and this deck, I think, does want that kind of mana, and also having the artifact stick around is nice. And then Balance. This is one of the decks that I think felt the impacts of the balance pointing. This was one of the ones that really did want it. It's another way for you to kind of catch up or slow down people who have particularly potent starts, and you have a lot of tutors to find it. So yeah, without much more to say, this is kind of this is it for Citadel Storm. You can play Paradox Engine in this deck. That's something that people do, but obviously in this current list on the database, they don't have that one in. I've definitely seen people play it, but Yeah, very fast, very aggressive combo deck. This is a fun one if you want to play a lot of games, and if you're looking to play some very cool non-deterministic combo. This would be my pick. I think that this deck is really, really fun to play, and I'm very excited that it is just still powerful in the format and something that people are interested in doing. So yeah, without further ado, this is Citadel Storm, the farthest end on the combo page, and I will now move on to something still very combo-oriented, but a little bit less so. I wanted to add quickly, I forgot to mention when you would play a deck like this. So Citadel Storm is the fastest deck in the format, and so as a result, you kind of get to ignore what everyone else is doing. I think this deck is particularly good into metagames where you have people playing hybrid combo decks because you're going to go faster than them, and we'll talk a bit about hybrid combo decks soon. And this deck is pretty good into like blue midrange and control metagames. This deck is capable of working through interaction on the stack because it has things like the silences. It also has access to things like defense grid, and you can just make them have it a non-zero amount of the time, and they aren't always going to have it. And also cards like Silence and Orm's Chant are really houses into those kinds of metas. So good into those metas. The decks it's worst against are probably the white-based Hate Bearsy decks. There's a bunch of those Hate Bears that this deck can't go off through, and you do not have that many pieces of interaction. And in particular, like things like the Archons of Emeria are really annoying to play against because not only do those interact with your combo, they interact with you finding answers for your combo or for their interaction, because they make it so that you can maybe only cast like one cantrip a turn, which is pretty annoying. And also the white-based mid-range decks tend to pressure your life total, which is the other thing that this deck hinges on. If you run out of life, you can't win the game. So, I mean, obviously, if you run out of life, you can't win the game. But in particular, this deck especially needs life to win the game, because going off from 14 versus going off from 8 is like leaps and bounds more difficult. So that's probably the worst to be playing into is creatures. But yeah, in general, you're allowed to play this deck kind of whenever, because it is just so proactive. It sits so far on the extreme that you are just allowed to be the person who's asking the questions, and it is just good at all times. Okay, so next up we have the next combo deck on the list. This one is also artifact based. This one is also pretty much just doing combo things. It's not going to win through fair mechanisms ever, but this one is slower than Citadel Storm. So this is Paradox Academy, a deck that I think is less well positioned these days, but has been around in the format for so long that I would be remiss if I didn't talk about it. So Paradox Academy is, as the name might insinuate, a Tolarian Academy Paradox Engine deck. So this is a deck that's looking to put Mana Rocks into play. It's then looking to put Paradox Engine into play somehow, and it is then looking to win the game once it has done that. So basically, Tolarian Academy and Paradox Engine are mana engines. The One Ring kind of breaks that notion, but generally speaking, they're mana engines. Once you have assembled your mana engine, you then want to typically cast some kind of card advantage spell. I know that in more recent times, the Paradox Academy players have been trying to find ways to do this that isn't symmetrical. So like, for example, historically, you've done things like cast Time Twister or Time Spiral or, Echo of Aeon's Wheel of Fortune. These draw 7s, and those are good. The issue is that it also refills your opponent's hand. And if you'll remember, Trent and I played on stream months ago now, where I was playing this deck against Trent on Esper Omni Show, and I had a draw where I just like made a bunch of mana, cast a draw 7, bricked on my draw 7, and died. And that can happen. So I know that the Paradox Engine players are looking for ways to play through that. We obviously have things like Narset and Hull Breacher as ways to make our draw 7s one-sided, and this is kind of nice because it is a bit of a plan B. Like, if you can set up Hull Breacher plus draw 7, you don't necessarily have to have some massive draw engine working or mana engine working. That is likely winning the game against a lot of the format. You just set them back to 0 cards in hand, and you've gone up to 7 and have 7 bonus mana mana. You can usually find ways to win the game from there. Other cards I'd like to call out, obviously Ugin, Eye of the Storms. This is a insanely powerful mid-range card that is capable of kind of chopping down boards, but then also obviously if you get to uptick it twice, like the -11 does just win the game, and you do cast a bunch of colorless cards out of this deck. So this is something that can come down as early as like turn 2, turn 3, and you can either zero it to add more mana and continue to exile more things, or it just sits there as this massive threat that your opponent has to deal with. So Ugin, very good, very powerful, recent addition to the deck. This deck also is another one that gets to make use of new format staple Stock Up, which is very powerful. But yeah, in general, you're looking to develop mana rocks on the early turns. This is also a Tinker deck, although it is less all-in on Tinker than, say, Citadel Storm was, like we talked about. This deck is more capable of, say, fabricating for the Paradox engine and just putting it into play. That's a thing that this deck is willing to do. It also might just draw it organically and cast its combo piece organically. Similarly, it's also got things like Transmute Artifact, where you're not really capable in the other deck in Citadel Storm of transmuting for Citadel. You can. It is a play that you make, but it's harder to do for sure, and I don't think everyone is on Transmute in those decks. Similarly, this deck is also looking to be more in on land untappers, because obviously Tolarian Academy is so powerful, so you've got things like Frantic Search in the deck. In terms of interaction, you are lower on interaction in this deck, actually, right? So you've got Veil of Summer, and then I believe this deck is also playing the Defense Grid. Oh, no, yeah. So we got Defense Grid, we've got Veil of Summer, but no silences, no Orm's Chance, no discard spells. So you are worse on the stack, but the difference is your pieces are more replaceable. So like this deck doesn't actually need Paradox engine to resolve to win the game. Much easier if it does, but you have like these planeswalkers which threaten to win the game. You've got a bunch of these creatures which can be engines in and of themselves. Or Urza, Lord High Artificer is great. Golos is this engine where if you can get it going, you can start activating it, you can threaten to win the game. Forensic Gadgeteer is a way to generate a lot of card advantage pretty quickly. Several of these planeswalkers threaten to win the game on their own. So you have more B plans. You are not so all in on winning with one particular thing. And it means that you're allowed to jam more freely. You can kind of just say, hey, can you counter this Tinker? Or hey, can you counter this Paradox engine? And if the answer is no, you win the game. And if the answer is yes, you say, okay, well, I'll keep playing. I'll build up some other plan, or maybe now I'll cast this draw 7 and use that to refill my hand, and I'm going to be working with way more mana than you are. So overall, this deck is pretty fun if you're someone who is interested in like playing a combo deck that has fewer linchpins. Like the thing about playing Citadel Storm is that like if you lose the Boros of Citadel, if you lose the Tinker, it becomes really, really hard to play the game. This deck does, I think, a better job of being able to offer up kind of like bait spells or play through one of your combos being shut down. And this deck also does one of the most fun things I think you can do in Magic, which is like untap the One Ring repeatedly. So obviously we've got some keys here, and those can be used to untap the One Ring as well as untapping some of these big mana rocks, which is very cool. And that's obviously like a very fun combo angle to be taking. The other thing this deck does have is that it does have an infinite combo, a variety of infinite combos with Rings of Brighthearth. So obviously Rings plus Basalt Monolith is the obvious easiest one, where you get to Rings plus Basalt Monolith just makes infinite colorless mana, and then you can go from there. But there's other things you can be doing in this deck with Rings that are neat as well, where getting copies of activated abilities that are going to be pretty powerful. Like you can copy Chromatic Aura reactivations, which is like very sweet, doesn't come up that often, but is very cool when it does. Rings plus Sensei's Top, also like once you have infinite mana, Rings plus Sensei's Top lets you draw your whole deck, which is pretty cool. And there's a bunch of other things. This is a deck that really rewards line learning and understanding what every card in your deck does. There's a lot of times where you might know that a piece resolving is more important than your opponent, and you can use that to your advantage. This deck has also a bit of a B plan. Like you can technically win the game with Urza's Saga token beatdown. It's hard. I don't think that it should be the plan that you're playing for most games, but it is a plan that does work, and it's one that you have access to, which is pretty cool as well. So when would you reach for this deck? Well, to be honest, I think the Paradox Academy is not very well positioned currently, just because it's quite bad into the fast combo decks, which are pretty popular, and it's not amazing into the white-based mid-range decks that are kind of cropping up to combat the fast combo. But Paradox Academy is good into blue mid-range. It's very happy to play against those kinds of decks. It's also pretty good into the kind of creature mid-range decks, just because you're doing really big broken things. You can kind of go over the top of those decks, and unlike Citadel Storm, which needs like more of its life total to win the game, like you can win the game at 1 pretty happily, which is also pretty good. And then this deck is also, I think, kind of like a it's kind of like the meta police. Like, this is like one of those decks where, like, if you show up with something that isn't efficient or is maybe doing something a little bit too dirtily and you get paired into Paradox Academy, like, they're just gonna do something broken on turn 3 or 4, like, basically every game. And if your deck is not doing something that's also broken that early or is interacting very efficiently, they're just gonna kill you. And so, like, this is, I think, a pretty reasonable one to bring into an unknown metagame, but it does struggle into other combo decks. That's probably the worst matchup for Paradox Academy. And you will have seen it on the channel recently when I played Time Vault into Jer on Paradox Academy. Like, the hybrid combo decks, this deck really struggles into when your opponent is able to play like 1 or 2 counter spells to offset what you're doing and then subsequently go for their own combo. It's very hard and you're going to struggle. But this deck is very good into the mid-range matchups. It's pretty good into aggro as well, I would say, like better than some of the other combo decks for sure. You just have more tools and you're more consistent, which matters a lot as well. Like, this deck is just going to do something powerful on turn 3 or 4 all the time, where some of the other combo decks run into problems where maybe they fizzle out or they keep a slightly speculative hand and it doesn't work out for them. So yeah, so this is Paradox Academy. I would reach for this deck if you like big mana, if you like artifacts, if you like doing casting draw 7s and doing like non-deterministic stuff. This is a fun one. But yeah, without further ado, let's move into some of the aforementioned hybrid combo decks. Okay, so next we have hybrid combo. This is Flash Hulk, one of my favorite decks, and I'm actually using Trent's list here because Trent won a Monday Night Highlander with this deck relatively recently. Well, April's kind of far away now, but this deck is not one that gets a lot of new cards very often, so this list is honestly, yeah, like, I feel pretty comfortable showing you this list. There's also obviously on the Canadian Highlander archive, there's a bunch of lists for this as well. The database has a list for this. There's a bunch of people, and obviously Trent has the shout out here for, hey, Kelvin the Goat, who's I would say the preeminent Flash Hulk player, and I would also happily defer to them on any Flash Hulk opinions if you are so inclined to pick someone who you think is like kind of the person who you're always going to defer to. I would happily defer to Kelvin. So Flash Hulk, this deck is in principle pretty simple, in practice more complicated to execute. So let's start with the actual combo. The actual combo is pretty simple. So you get your Protean Hulk, you get your Flash. This was at one time, where's your Flash? Jesus, Trent has the magic 25 art. So you have your Flash, you have your Hulk. Basically, for 2 mana, you get to put Hulk into play, and then Flash says, oh, would you like to pay the extra cost for this card to keep it in play? And you say no. You sacrifice the Protean Hulk. This lets you go get 6 converted mana cost of creatures and put them into play. Previously, you had to do Revelark loops, Karmic Guide stuff. Oh my god, I'm knocking over my microphone. I'm so enthusiastic about it. You had to do a bunch of garbage, basically, to make Flash Hulk kill people, and it took up a bunch of slots in your deck. And that's no longer true, which is part of why this deck in the last kind of 3-4 years has really... I mean, it's always kind of been the boogeyman of the format, to be honest, but I think now especially it's really potent. So you sack your Hulk, and you get to go get Samwise Gamgee, Cauldron Familiar, Viscera Seer, Sylvan Safekeeper, and then you're actually just floating an extra CMC. So some lists will play Ginger Brute in this slot as the 6th mana that you can spend, and the Ginger Brute is important because it's a food that comes into play right away. So basically the way the combo works, Sam sees these other 3 creatures enter. When Sam sees these 3 creatures enter, it makes 3 foods. You can then sack the Cauldron Familiar to the Viscera Seer, and then sack one of the foods to the Cauldron Familiar to bring it back, and that's a loop, and it drains your opponent for 1 every time. And because you even have extra foods in play because of the SAM, you can even beat 1 or 2 pieces of targeted graveyard hate, because you can just re-sacrifice a food over the top of their graveyard hate to get the cat out of the graveyard in response to like a relic activation, or I guess more likely in Highlander, like a Ghost Vacuum or an Unlicensed Hearst activation. And some people play the Ginger Brute because it lets you go off even sooner. Like if someone tries to kill the cat with the Samwise triggers on the stack, and they can somehow get through all of your Sylvan Safekeeper activations, then it lets you go off in response to a spell. So like there is, I think that Force of Despair is the Modern Horizons 2 force that no one plays, where you can like pitch a black card to kill all creatures that entered the battlefield this turn. Technically this version not beating a Force of Despair, but that's I think the only card that this combo doesn't beat. You also see people sometimes not playing Sylvan Safekeeper and instead playing Grand Abolisher. Grand Abolisher, I think I've finally come around on this, is worse just because it loses to a couple more random things. Like you lose to say like Otawara, which is like kind of annoying. It is worse against something like Caracas. So there's not a lot of reasons why you would want Sylvan Safekeeper over Grand Abolisher, but I think there's enough that it is worth making that change. So yeah, so you have a 2-mana, 2-card combo that wins the game at instant speed. Very good, very powerful. Obviously, this is a good reason to want to play this deck. So the rest of your deck is largely in support of that combo. So you've got cantrips and tutors, basically all the ones that are playable. And this deck is so desperate to tutor for either of the pieces. Like we're playing tutors that basically no one else in the format will. Like Heuristic Tutor, this card is bad. This card is a piece of trash. But in this deck, it's playable because finding both Flash and Hulk is so important, and so we're willing to reach for this one. Same thing with something like Insatiable Avarice. Like this card is expensive, but it's just so important that you have tutors that can find either half that you're willing to reach for it. And additionally, Flash is 7 points, which really constrains where you're allowed to spend your points. So this deck used to play Balance. I know Trent actually didn't like playing Balance, so he was quite happy when it got pointed. But pointing Balance did kind of boot it out of Flash Hulk, but your points are Flash is 7, and then Trent's on Imseal, Mystical, Merchant Scroll. You can also play, I've played versions where instead of playing the Imseal and the Mystical, you play Vamp instead of 2 of those 1-pointers. I think that's fine too. But yeah, you're spending your points on the tutors you can afford, and then the rest of your deck is actually surprisingly interactive. And this deck actually, it's not a hybrid combo deck in the sense that like you're going to attack them to death with Fierce Empaths and Baleful Strixes, but it's a hybrid combo deck in the sense that it is actually surprisingly good at playing defense, right? So if you look at the number of counterspells in this deck, you've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, although this one only sort of counts, 7, 8, you've got 8 like counter spells. You've got Veil of Summer. You've got Silence, Swords to Plowshares, Fatal Push, Abrupt Decay, Thoughtseize. You have all the discard spells. Your deck is very good at interacting both on the stack and on the battlefield. This deck has an easier time working its way through hate than a lot of the other combo decks do. And especially against the blue decks, you just have these like really like kind of checkmatey feeling situations for your opponent where like you're passing with mana open, they know you have at least one of the combo pieces. And if they don't have a board developed for whatever reason, like it's really, really challenging for them to tap out or to tap low in any meaningful way because they can just die at any time. So this deck is very good, has been a menace at varying different times of the format's existence, is probably very good now. I know like when Spellseeker came off the list, I felt like, whoa, that's a scary one to give back to Hulk for free. And this is definitely a deck that leverages Spellseeker very effectively. Other things that are going on here that are worth keeping in mind is that this is a deck where you have to mulligan very aggressively. So if you are someone who looks at this deck and thinks, oh, this is really cool, that's the one piece of advice I would give, is that you are really not supposed to keep hands where you don't have a really clear path to both combo pieces, ideally, and you wanna have on 7 and 6 at least, you want to be able to say, here's one piece, and I know that here's my path to find the second one. And I think that far too often, because the combo takes 2 cards, you have people kind of keeping hands that are a little bit too speculative, or have too many cantrips, not enough tutors, and you don't know that you're going to get there when you keep a hand that's mostly cantrips. So why would you want to play this deck? Well, this deck is good into metagames where other combo decks are doing well, because if you look at, say, like Paradox Academy or Citadel Storm, they don't like playing against Flash Hulk very much, because Flash Hulk has way more interaction on the stack, so it can disrupt your combo and still go for its own, and it's going to end the game on the spot. So it's quite good into metagames with a lot of fast combo. Flash Hulk historically has feasted on Jeskai, which has kind of been one of the main metagame factors for a really long time. Jeskai has hung around, and spoiler alert, that will appear later in this video. Flash Hulk for me is like another, if you want to beat up on Jeskai, Flash Hulk, great deck to register. They just have a very hard time interacting with the combo. They don't have that many counter spells, and you get to line up against their counter spells pretty favorably, and you even play enough interaction where you can sometimes remove their first and even their second threat sometimes, which is a nightmare for Jeskai. This deck is worse into the white-based mid-range decks for sure, and this is a trend you're going to see, that these combo decks they're going to struggle into like the white-based Death and Taxes decks. This deck as well has a bit of a harder time with the tempo shells that are maybe going to be able to assemble like pressure plus disruption. I think that all the combo decks kind of struggle with the blue-black tempos of the world a little bit, and Flash Hulk is definitely one that's even more susceptible to it, just because like some of the things like Opposition Agent and the discard spells in particular line up pretty well against Flash Hulk, because Flash Hulk needs 2 specific cards to go off. Discard can be pretty challenging for it to play through. So those are the things that you wouldn't want to play against, I think. The reasons why you would register Flash Hulk is, well, if you want to win, you would register Flash Hulk, because I think this deck is very, very good. But also, like, if you enjoy playing combo decks where you're kind of constantly measuring whether or not it's the right turn to tap out for a tutor, or whether you want to try and hold up some interaction, and you want to actually feel like the game is not solitaire per se with Flash Hulk. It's about finding the spots to do the tutoring. I mean, obviously sometimes you have hands where you start with a combo piece in hand and you have a really clear path to finding the second one. And those games feel disgusting from both sides, I think, a lot of the time. But yeah, Flash Hulk, great deck, very cool, very powerful. I like this one a lot. And we will move on now to the last of the combo decks. Okay. Last of the combo decks, this is Time Vault. This is, I think, maybe the most, well, for me, this is the most controversial list I have on most controversial deck list I have in the video. This is not how I would build Time Vault. However, this is undeniably the most winningest, long-term successful version of Time Vault, and I don't think that it would be appropriate for me to represent the deck list in any way other than in this. So this is the list from the Canadian Highlander database, although if you go look on the Canadian Highlander Winners Archives, there are many lists from Discord user Regorn, who wins with that deck all the time. So this deck is obviously based around assembling Time Vault plus Untapper, and there's a lot of Untappers now, but historically it's been Time Vault plus Voltaic Key, and Wizards has just kind of like slowly printed more and more Untappers, which has made Time Vault better and better. Certainly historically, Time Vault has been like a blue-black or Grixis deck, and if you're old enough like me, you remember when like Grixis Time Vault was the Time Vault Splinter Twin deck, and you would be doing things like playing Time Vault on turn 2 and then untapping it manually on turn 3 with your Pestermiter Deceiver XR to just get an extra turn the traditional way. And obviously technology has evolved since then, and sadly Splinter Twin is not a card we can put in decks anymore, much to my chagrin. But what we have now is a Time Vault deck that actually is base Bant. This version that I have here is splashing some black cards, although I believe that the more common version, honestly, is just Bant. Yeah, you have This deck is largely playing around Urza's Saga as a kind of plan B. So you can see like it's even going as far as playing Search for Glory, which is basically only ever finding Urza's Saga or one of the Planeswalkers, which is pretty interesting. And then you've got this package of artifacts to kind of help ramp you up, and also they enable Urza's Saga to be better. It also enables tutors like Whir of Invention. This is a deck that also, as you can see, kind of in the same vein as Flash Hulk is leading on some counterspells, and these ones are even more traditional counterspells like Counterspell, Loose Focus, Mana Leak, Spell Pierce, Reprieve, Remand, right? So you're able to play a more fair game, kind of tempo your opponent out. And then from green, from green, you get access to some really potent 3-drops, some of the best ones ever printed, obviously. So Oko, Thief of Crowns, Uro is great. Sowing Mycospawn is an awesome way to be able to find, again, Urza's Saga is what this deck is doing, which I think is pretty interesting. Or Tolarian Academy. If you've got enough artifacts, you can also use it as a kind of mana engine. And yeah, you're kind of playing this two-way game plan again. You've always got the threat of assembling Vault Key, but then you've got this mid-range plan based around like Urza's Saga and Urza. Basim is a very cool is a very cool piece as well, just like a nice way to generate some card advantage. That's actually not one I've seen in the list before. And then, yeah, you've still got your interactive spells, your Abrupt Decay, Assassin's Trophy, Swords to Plowshares, Path to Exile. So yeah, very cool deck, very powerful deck, very winning deck. This deck has won a lot. This list, I think, is a little bit old. Obviously, there were a couple of new cards printed in Edge of Eternities, which are going to have really jacked up the power level of Time Vault. Actually, hold on. Maybe I'm looking at an old list, huh? Let's look together. I clicked this one because it was the first one I saw. That was Time Vault. Yeah, no, I think I'm right. I think this just hasn't been updated in a while, because yeah, here it is. Okay, well, at any rate, the new cards, they don't fundamentally change the way that the deck is built. So this is Time Vault. It's very cool, very powerful. You would play this one if you wanted to be as mid-rangey as you wanted as possible in the combo deck, right? So this is the one that has the most potential of just winning a game the normal way. You can win games by just getting an early Uro, escaped from the graveyard, and attacking. You might just kill your opponent that way. You can win games with Saga constructs a lot of the time. You do not have to win the game with Time Vault. In fact, you could play games where that card doesn't exist in your deck, and it would just be fine. Obviously, you'd much rather have it. It's 7 points for a reason, but or 6 points for a reason. Sorry. Oh no, it is 7 points. 7 points for a reason. But yeah, this is definitely on the mid-rangiest side. So that's the biggest reason, I think, if you wanted to play Time Vault. So Time Vault's good matchups are, I know I keep saying it, but the combo decks are just good against blue. Time Vault's actually probably one of the least good combo decks into blue, just because it is trying to be the most mid-rangey, and as a result is maybe the most liable to be picked apart, and everything happens at sorcery speed, which isn't great for it as well. But it is, and it's quite poor into, again, the fast combo matchups. Like Time Vault does not really want to play against fast combo. It's pretty happy to play against other hybrid combo, I will say. And actually, you know what? No, Time Vault is actually probably pretty good into Citadel Storm. I don't know what I was saying. So yeah, fast combo, you're probably pretty happy to play it too, because you're also doing combo-y things. The creature-based matchups are reasonable for this deck as well, although, again, like the white-based mid-range decks are going to be somewhat annoying. Overall, Time Vault has a tendency, in my opinion, to have a relatively flat matchup table, and that's another good reason to play this deck. Is like there's not a whole lot of metas where registering Time Vault is going to feel atrocious. Like you're not going to sit down and be like, well, I played 4 matches today that felt impossible. There's just not that many decks in the format that really beat up on it. Like the blue-black tempo decks are pretty good against it. Like that kind of blue-black based mid-range is going to be fine, but even against the other blue decks or against the white-based mid-range, like you've just got enough fair tools in the deck that you can kind of grind your way through some number of those matchups pretty effectively. So it's a very flat matchup table. You're also not like incredibly favored against most of the format as well. Like, you're kind of sitting really solidly in the like probably 48 to 52 range. Unless, unless of course your name is Regorn, in which case you are winning every Discord tournament. It feels like, but yeah, very cool deck. I think that this one's very sweet. This should obviously have the new Tezzeret. It's a powerful addition, and Scour for Scrap, 4 mana. Go get an artifact, also a powerful addition to this deck as well that I don't have here, but that's okay. Not the end of the world. Let's move on. We're finally out of the combo realm. I wanted to do the full gambit though of combo decks because I do think there's a range for sure in terms of how all in the combo decks are. All right, I lied. This deck is still a combo deck, but like, I mean, it's only kind of a combo deck. So this is Bant Nadu combo. I'm using a list here. This is from council member Spencer, who won a Monday Night Highlander quite recently playing Nadu. So I figured I would show off this list. This is a Bant. Technically, Moxfield thinks it's 4-color because of Fiend Artisan and Deathrite Shaman, but it's Bant. So this is a Bant creature combo deck, but it's worth noting that this deck does a pretty good job of playing the fair match as well. So what is Bant Nadu trying to do? Bant Nadu is kind of the continuation of creature combo decks in Canadian Highlander. They've always existed in some form or another, and it's kind of fluctuated what kind of things you're going to be doing. So early on, there were like things like Kiki Pod. That was a thing we were doing. And then that deck evolved into being Seeker Walk or Seeker Pod or Pat Pod, whatever you want to call it, which was still had the Kiki Jiki combo, but was more based around just assembling some kind of Spell Seeker, Time Walk, Infinite combo. And that deck was quite powerful for a while, although it has largely dropped off in popularity recently. I still like that deck and think it's quite good. I played a version of it on the channel recently. Which you can check out, and I won't be featuring Spellseeker or Seeker Walk in this video, but I figured I would feature Nadu, which is the most recent addition to the kind of creature combo archetype. So obviously the eponymous Nadu, this is obviously just an incredibly broken card, given 1 point for a reason, banned at a bunch of formats for a reason. Maybe we shouldn't change the text box of cards so close to their ship date because we're worried that they're going to break Commander. If you don't know that story, apparently Nadu's original text was something to the effect of your other spells have flash, and close to the kind of ship date for Modern Horizons 3, where they weren't going to be able to change text boxes anymore, someone said, I think that might be too broken for Commander. Let's change it to this text box, which will obviously be much less broken for Commander, and the rest is history. So Nadu is a combo card that combos with free activated abilities. So it combos with, in this deck, Shuko, as well as Nomads Encore, are the two main combo engines in this deck. These are going to allow you to infinitely target all of your creatures. There are also a couple of other ways that you can target things that aren't necessarily infinite but go on for quite a while. So like Sylvan Safekeeper, you can get a lot of value out of. Scythe Cat Cub and Bristly Bill are also creatures that generate targets when lands enter the battlefield. So you don't necessarily need one of the infinite targeting mechanisms to make this work, although obviously it is much easier if you have it. In this particular list, Spencer decided to go for a wider point spread where he's playing 2 Moxes, Strip Mine, Urza Saga, White Plume Adventurer, and Nadu, which I think is pretty interesting. And this deck, above all the other combo decks, obviously, is just so much more capable of winning a game where you just never cast Nadu, you never see any of the cards related to the combo. If you just look, like, our deck is just full of, like, mana dorks and powerful creatures. And the fact that we have kind of this, like, 8-card package for Nadu slipped in is not necessarily going to prevent us from winning a mid-range game, right? Like, the only things that we're really playing to support the Nadu are like Shuko, Nomads. Like, you probably wouldn't play like Finale of Devastation if you weren't playing Nadu. You probably wouldn't play Nature's Rhythm if you weren't playing Nadu, but these aren't even like embarrassing cards to have in a mid-range context. So you are plan A, looking to assemble Nadu and do something degenerate and broken with Nadu and win the game that way. And it is nice to have a way out of matchups that would otherwise be challenging. It's nice to always have a kind of live way to end the game on the spot. And otherwise, we're just looking to be a mid-range deck and be powerful Bant Midrange casting, good Bant cards at all points in the curve, and you're going to win the game both ways. You might, if you play 4 matches, you might win 2 with the combo and 2 without. Bright Class Gearhulk is obviously a card that we have learned is incredibly powerful in the format, and it is on full display in this deck. It's very, very good. Bright Glass in this deck gets to be able to go get like Urza Saga. It can find Urza Saga, Nomad's Encore, Shuko. It finds all the chunks of the Nadu combo other than Nadu. It's obviously good to just find 2 Moxes. You can cast Bright Class, get 2 Moxes, cast something else, which is like a great tempo swing as well. So very cool kind of mid-rangey creature combo deck. You would want to register this if you like creature combo. And I say that I think there's like an identifiable group of people that like creature combo. I'm definitely one of them, but it's definitely an acquired taste. It's not for everyone necessarily. And I think the other reason to register a deck like this deck is going to be a lot more capable of kind of, again, having more flat matchup spreads. And this deck is actually good into, say, those white-based creature decks that are trying to feast on some of the other combo decks. Like, those people are going to be registering your Archon of Emirias or your creatures that have like poor statted bodies, but the text boxes are powerful, and you can just decide that those text boxes don't matter to you. You'll just play a mid-range game this game. So yeah, I really like this Nadu deck. I think it's very powerful, very potent. It's definitely a deck that I think is going to be around for a while. You have just so many tools, and Nadu is only going to get better, I think, as they keep printing more things that might do things that are kind of akin to Bristly Bill and Scythe Cat Cub. So this is one to keep an eye on, and one that you can kind of register in any metagame. It's never really bad. I think it's worst in metagames where red is very popular. This deck does not love playing against like Fury, for example, but in general, you can play this into basically any metagame. This is the first of the combo-ish decks that I've showed that probably isn't amazing into Jeskai. In those matchups, you want to be playing towards your more mid-rangey game plan, and sometimes you're not going to get there, but it's not an undoable matchup by any means. It's probably maybe 50-50, maybe slightly worse than that, but very, very reasonable, all things considered. And now we're really getting into non-combo decks. There's no combos. Okay, so I think I would be remiss if I skipped this deck in my list of kind of quote-unquote meta stock decks. Now, Mono Red is a deck that has really fallen by the wayside in recent years. It's really hard to play this deck into a metagame where people are doing things like casting Barrogoyf and Tamiyo on turn 1. Like, those cards are very, very strong into what Mono Red is trying to do. That being said, there are still players who are playing it and winning with it. In particular, a friend of mine in Victoria winning a Monday Night Highlander at YJ, playing this list. And this is actually like Mono Red, and it's a bunch of 1-drops, and it's aggressive. There's also a medium red deck that you will see people play, and I have not included that in this video. I'll explain why a little bit later, but that deck is a bit more of a mid-range deck with some prison elements, and this really is Mono Red. Yes, you have like Magus of the Moon and Blood Moon, and like Maddening Hex, Rolling Vortex, well, Maddening Hex basically, but these are here because they're going to kill our opponent. They're not here to be kind of any kind of prison element. So this for a long time was the classic format police in Canadian Highlander. When you were building decks, you had to ask yourself, can my deck beat Mono Red? Because there were going to be enough people playing it on any given night that you knew you were going to play against it like probably once, maybe more than once on a given night. So what is this deck trying to do? Well, it's pretty straightforward, right? You are casting powerful 1-drop. Ideally, this is one of the issues with the deck, is that the quality of 1-drop in a lot of other decks has gone up, and you really don't have that many good ones. Like Goblin Guide is a card that like at times is not good enough anymore, which is kind of absurd to say. But yeah, you're basically looking to curve out with 1-drop, 2-drop, 3-drop every time. You now have some nice answers to life gain that have been printed relatively recently in Screaming Nemesis and Sunspire Links. These are not cards that have existed for a long time, and I do think that their existence really has helped the deck. Mono Red is this interesting deck where basically every set it's going to maybe get a card, because they do just keep printing decent red aggressive cards. Like if you look, right, like this like Flame Cash Gecko, just like a whatever draft uncommon, but this one's quite good. If you get to cast it after dealing damage, it's basically a Burning Tree Emissary with an ability, pretty obscene, and double spelling is something that Mono Red is definitely looking to do. So the other things that this deck has now is that it's playing a bit more of a pump spell package. So we've got like Monstrous Rage, Dreadmaw's Ire, Opera Love Song, Siege Smash. These are kind of ways to either punch through damage if your opponent does have a larger blocker, or just punch through damage sometimes. Obviously, like are there double strike creatures in this deck? I don't know. Sometimes we end up playing them, sometimes we don't. Yeah, it doesn't look like there are any double strike creatures in this deck. But anyway, the pump spells are certainly something that people, I think, have realized have nice equity. They're a bit better at potentially punching through damage where you would otherwise get none. The other thing that this deck is doing is it gets to play Mana Crypt, which is a card that keeps going up in points value because it is so powerful, and because Mono Red doesn't really need to dedicate points anywhere else, it gets to play this one pretty happily. You'll notice this is a 10-point deck. It's got Strip Mine, Mox Ruby, Ancient Tomb, and Mana Crypt. So you get the best fast mana, and you also get access to Strip Mine, which is pretty exciting. This deck is very consistent, right? It's going to present lethal on like turn 3 or 4 most of the games, turn 5 at the latest, and that's very good. You don't want to play this deck into a metagame where people are playing a bunch of mid-range decks, especially. So this deck is going to struggle when you're running into a bunch of Barrogoyfs and other kind of like mid-range threats like that people tend to play. And if you watch my recent video where I'm playing Bug Seeker Smog against medium red is what my opponent was playing in that video, but I just resolved a Metamorphosis Fanatic and I put 10 power of lifelink on the board, and the game ended when that happened, more or less. So there are things that you have to worry about in that regard, and I wouldn't play this into a metagame where there was a lot of black based midrange. That being said, this deck does have the power to just beat anything, because at the end of the day, dealing 20 damage in 4 turns is just always going to be pretty good. Mono Red tends to be better against the hybrid combo decks than it is against the fast combo decks. Against the fast combo decks, it's like just straight up a race, and usually you're a little bit slower. Ironically, Mono Red is very good against Citadel Storm, like the best fast combo deck, because they need to use their life total. So Mono Red just like spends the first 2 turns of the game like making it so that the Citadel Storm player like has a very, very hard time going off, because they have so little life by the time they do potentially put a Citadel in play. So it's good into those matchups too. But yeah, in general, this is, I think, a good starting point if you are someone who wants to get into the format on more of a budget. This deck obviously is still not that cheap, but if you're playing in an environment where you can potentially proxy some of these cards or something like that, like proxying the Mana Crypt and the Mox Ruby already knocks a bunch of the cost off this deck, and it's something that you can play pretty quickly and feel like you're still going to be capable of winning games. But yeah, Mono Red is actually very complicated to play, I think, as well. It's one of those decks that has way more depth to it than people realize a lot of the time. But in terms of explaining the overarching plan, it's not that complicated. We're trying to deal 20 to our opponent in the most efficient way possible, and the decisions that you'll make during gameplay are related to when do you occasionally like point a burn spell at a creature instead of at your opponent's face? How do you sequence out a hand that has 2 1-drops, 2 2-drops? Do you go 1-drop, 1-drop, or do you potentially go like if you have like 3 1-drops and 2 2-drops or something, do you go like 1-drop, 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 and then play the 2-drop on the subsequent turn? Like that. Those are the kinds of decisions you end up needing to make. But yeah, overall, this deck is very sweet. It's very efficient. I recommend, if you've never tried something like this before, or if you're maybe newer to the Canadian Highlander format, I would give it a shot. This is something where previously this deck was easy to recommend because it was just a tier 1 deck. And now I'm putting this in the meta decks for video because I think it is important to discuss, and it's good to present because it is just one of the easiest entry options. I would say that this deck is decidedly not really in the meta currently, though. It's something that is on the periphery and is sort of in the tier 2, tier 3 range of playability. But that being said, you can definitely still win games with it. Definitely still win, I think, even tournaments with it. Obviously, this is a YJQP winning deck list. So this deck won 4-0 at a 30-odd person tournament at Yellow Jacket. So it's clearly capable of winning tournaments. But yeah, definitely not as easy as it used to be. Okay, so next we have what I would describe as kind of the next progression of aggro decks in Canadian Highlander. So this is Boros Taxes, and this is kind of supplanted Mono Red as the aggressive format police style deck. If you're looking to be aggressive, this is where I would point most players to start. I think this deck is quite powerful. So what is going on here? You have a lot of the same powerful red cards that we saw in Mono Red, but you're not really playing any of the like 1-drops that are basically only there because they have efficient stats. You're only really playing the red cards that either either create a lot of bodies, right? Like Gut Truziel Zealot is a great example. This card is pretty absurd if you can get it going. Even just making 1/4/1 is already very good. If you ever get to make 2, you're probably winning that game. Fury speaks for itself. This card's great. Really breaks open creature mirrors. Lelia is also a similarly really powerful one. Broadside Bombardier is great at pushing through damage and or clearing out boards, making blocking a nightmare. Flage is, again, speaks for itself, very powerful. Another card that has made playing Mono Red pretty challenging. And then you also get access to like some of the red removal. So you have Lightning Bolt, Price of Progress. These decks sometimes reach for Chain Lightning, though I think this specific list that I'm showing is not. So yeah, there are a decent number of ways to play this Boros Taxes deck. And then this one is also playing, sorry, this is the other part of the shell that is important, is that the white is there because you get to play all these hate bears, right? So Anointed Peacekeeper, Archon of Emeria, Aven Mind Sensor, Boromir Warden of the Tower, Clarion Conqueror, Containment Priest, Leonin Arbiter, Felia is not really a hate bear, but it does some hate bearsy things sometimes. Remorseful Cleric, Thalia's. You know, you really do, you get to play a lot of these hate bears. And what this does is it makes it so that this deck really dunks on the combo decks. In particular, a lot of these white hate bears are close to unbeatable for the combo decks when backed up with pressure, especially, which is what this deck does such a good job of doing. This deck can sometimes put 1 or 2 hate bears in play on turns like 2 and 3, or if you have a Mox draw, maybe you even do it on turn 1 and 2. And then from there, you're not only able to kind of beat your opponent down with these hate bears, but the rest of your deck is built around supporting closing the door really quickly. So this deck also mid-ranges pretty well. You just have a bunch of good mid-range threats, like Flage is amazing in those matchups. You have these like Mother of Runes, Giver of Runes things that are quite powerful at making combat math really complicated. Winota is a great top-end threat that has the potential to generate a lot of advantage. This is a card that I was surprised saw as much play as it does, but it is genuinely very powerful. Obviously, banned in Pioneer, and I played it in the Pioneer times. And actually, you can ask Trent about playing Winota in Pioneer. Trent was a Winota degen for a couple of months there before it got banned. And obviously the individual power level on this card is very high, but in the Canadian Highlander format, it also works really well. You can see there's a pretty nice mix here of humans and non-humans, so you're able to set up situations where you are often getting 2 or 3 triggers to resolve and actually put a creature in play, like relatively routinely, and it's hard to lose games after that happens. So yeah, you've got aggressive creatures, you've got hate bears, and then supporting it, you've got some removal. The removal suite changes based on the build of the deck. So this person who won a Win-A-Duel tournament recently, it's why I'm showing off this list, is playing like Lightning Bolt and then mostly white removal. You'll also see people reaching for more of the red removal. In particular, Chain Lightning is a card that's absent from this deck list that I'm a bit surprised to see, but you don't have to play it by any means. And then you've also got like Price of Progress as a way to close the door or potentially come over the top of the more greedy mana bases. And particularly things like the Jeskai and 4-color control decks that are going to drive the game long against you. It's nice to have this card that, if you draw it, oftentimes is just winning the game on the spot at instant speed. And then lastly, you've got a fast mana suite kind of tying the room together. So like Chrome Mox, Soul Ring, Mana Crypt, Mox Diamond, Lotus Petal even. This person went really deep on the fast mana. And it's interesting, you'll see their last point is Ancient Tomb and White Plume Adventurer. So they decided to eschew a Mox entirely. I don't know if that's necessarily what I would do. I don't think that is entirely stock. But it's definitely something you can do, and I think you are increasingly seeing people decide that Soul Ring is busted at 3 and that they want to be playing Soul Ring at 3 whenever possible. And this is obviously a deck where, if you look at the pips cost, you can very happily support playing Soul Ring. You have a lot of colorless costs that you can pay. So yeah, this deck is very aggressive, very disruptive, and those two things combined mean that it has largely good matchup tables. So this deck, you would want to play this deck if you see a lot of combo. This is the everyone's playing combo. What do I do to beat combo? Like, you reach for this deck. There are also variants of Death and Taxes that are mono white, where you don't play any of the red cards. You go even deeper on the hate bears and kind of like the white weenie style of aggressive creatures. There's also a black-white version of this deck that beats up on combo even harder because it starts playing things like the Tide Hollow Sculler effects and discard spells. That one is also powerful, but loses some equity in the fair matchups. The red cards are really the cards that make the fair matchup work for you. But those are kind of like the three. There are 3 at least flavors of this kind of Taxes deck, and Boros is definitely the one that people play the most often. You're happy to play it in a combo, like that's when you reach for this deck. But you also have game into the mid-range and aggressive decks as well. I would say that most of your matchups are around 50-50. You're good against combo. This is a deck that the one matchup where it kind of struggles, I think, is against like green-based mid-range decks, that like non-blue green-based mid-range. So like Jund, Naya are kind of doing the same thing as you. They don't care about your hate bears very much, and they're often going bigger and faster than you unless you draw fast mana. But even then, obviously, you do have fast mana in the deck to make up some of that disadvantage. So even then, I think it's pretty playable. And green-based mid-range is not a deck that's super widely played at the moment. So you kind of get to benefit from the fact that the metagame is well positioned for a deck list like this to do well. But yeah, so this is Boros Death and Taxes. Very cool deck list. Very cool strategy. Definitely something that's kind of cropped up recently as a response to how much combo there is in the metagame. And this is definitely one that I think will continue to be powerful for a long time. The mana has finally gotten good enough to support playing 2 colors pretty cleanly, and playing all the best red cards and all the best white cards. You finally hit a point where they are not really working against each other. For a long time, this kind of Boros deck, you would run into like wrong half problems, but now the power level of the cards is just so high that you're not really wrong halved anymore. You're just playing this pretty high synergy aggressive deck that is leading on these hate bears that are now just like somewhat reasonably statted, like 2/3 flyer for a hate bear on 3. That's fine, right? Like Hushwing Griff was a 2/1, and it's not a card that we were really allowed to play very much just because the stats on it were kind of embarrassing. But now they're statting these cards in a way that is actually competitive, and as a result, this deck has really gone up in power level. Okay, cool. So that's the end of the aggressive decks. I'll come back with the first mid-range deck in the list. Okay, so next we have black-red midrange. I'm showing off Jer's list. There's a bunch of different ways that you can play this deck, but I chose Jer's list just because it's the one that we've played on the channel most often, so it's probably the one that we're most likely to want to refer back to at some point. So black-red midrange is decidedly more mid-rangey than the Boros Death and Taxes deck I just showed, although you will see certainly a decent number of cards that cross over between both, and sometimes people call this deck an aggro deck. It's close. I think that modern MTG card design has made it such that the line between aggro and mid-range is pretty blurred because you're very rarely casting anything that costs more than 4 anyway. So what really is an aggro deck anymore? But so what this deck is doing is it's looking to pair the disruptive black elements of like discard spells and removal with the aggressive, efficient red creatures. And we saw the same creatures in Boros Taxes, but it's things like Fury, Broadside, Bombardiers, Gut, Lelia, Ragavan, Pyrogoyf. These are all cards that appear in both archetypes. In Black-Red as well, you get access to a good number of gold cards. Black-Red is actually one of the few color combinations that really wants quite a lot of its gold cards. Most gold cards these days have kind of fallen out of favor. We don't play that many multicolored cards in the format right now, but cards like Blood Tithe Harvester, Carnage Interpreter, Chaos Defiler are all really good. Obviously, Croaks is pretty reasonable. This is one that Jer likes that some other people don't love as much, but I can understand why you want to play this one. I think it seems pretty good. Molten Collapse, quite good as well. Bedevil is a card of somewhat infamy. I know that Jer differs on many people on its playability. Fire Covenant is a super powerful one. That is in the black-red color pair. So what this deck is basically trying to do is you get to spend your first couple of turns being disruptive and maybe establishing some kind of threat that's quite large, and then you're looking to keep your opponent off kilter with more discard spells and removal while developing larger and larger threats onto the board. You also have access to some of the more reasonable hate bears in the format. Opposition Agent is premium. It's one of the best ones against combo decks while also having applications against fair decks, just because even just tagging a fetch land is quite good. And honestly, a lot of decks in the format want to search their library. This is just a thing that you're going to try and do a lot of the time. So Oppo is quite good in those situations. Orcish Bowmaster, similarly, it's like decent against the combo decks, but also just broadly good against people trying to play Magic. It turns out that many people want to want to draw extra cards on their turn, and obviously Orcish Bowmaster punishes that. One thing that Jer is not doing that other people are is Jer's point spread is double Mox, Soul Ring, Reanimate, so he's really in on the fast mana. What other people will do is play a spread with Vampiric Tutor, and if you play the Vampiric Tutor spread, then you're usually playing Metamorphosis Fanatic and Animate Dead, and you'll notice that oh, no, sorry, Jer is on Animate Dead, but Metamorphosis Fanatic is the one that Jer is not playing that other people routinely do. The reanimation spells are quite powerful, both in terms of recurring your own threats, but Reanimate and Animate Dead are both capable of targeting your opponent's creatures as well, which is pretty good. So if you can kill something high impact on their side and then reanimate it to use on your side, obviously that's going to be a high swing play, and that's something that this black-red deck is looking to do pretty regularly. Besides that, there's not a whole lot else going on here. You are just playing kind of the best removal spells, the best red threats, and using those to put pressure on your opponent. This deck goes long surprisingly well. So many of the cards that you top deck in this deck are 2-for-1s in and of themselves, or are poised to take over the game if they stick around. Things like Overlord of the Baelmerk, Inti, Hostile Investigator is one that can start to really go off if you can generate multiple discards for your opponent. Fear of Missing Out, obviously generating multiple combat's quite good. Caves of Chaos Adventurer. Like all of these cards are cards that are 2-for-1s. Chaos Defiler, right? Like he's going to kill something on ETB and when it dies. So this deck grinds very effectively, which is I think why I have it slotted more towards the mid-range side of the spectrum than the aggressive side of the spectrum. Something that Jer's doing, which is cute, that not everyone is playing Demonic Council. So this deck is pretty good at enabling Delirium. It has a good number of types. You have like the baubles in your deck as well, Mishra and Urza's Bauble. You have enchantments, land, and then obviously instant sorcery creature, pretty easy to get in there. And if you can enable Delirium, obviously Demonic Council is just DT. That's great. You're very happy to just be DTing for 0 points. But this also can just find a couple of pretty reasonable demons. Most importantly, Chaos Defiler is a demon. So worst case, this Demonic Council has this kind of bailout mode of just finding your best 5-drop, which is, I think, a totally fine place to be. I don't know if there are any other demons. I think that might be the literal only one. So if you are missing that one, you've played it already or you've drawn it, then I think you do need to turn on Delirium for it to do anything else. But it does have the nice side effect of just always being able to find Chaos Defiler, which is quite good. This deck grinds really well. This deck plays a bunch of super sweet cards. I think you reach for this deck if you want to play non-blue midrange. I do think that at time of recording, this is the premium and best non-blue midrange deck. It is going to be able to fight against the blue midrange decks pretty effectively. It has all the tools to do so. It also has the ability to win the game out of nowhere against some of those decks with cards like Blood Moon. Jared's not playing Price of Progress. A lot of people do. I think I probably would if I was building this deck. And similarly, I think Jared is on Magus, but he's not on Price. I would probably include that one as well as a way to kind of beat up on the 3 and 4 color midrange decks. And then this deck, it's definitely worst into combo. The tools that you have against combo are fine, but they are limited, right? So you have discard spells, you have a couple of hate bears, you have the capacity to pressure their life total, but sometimes that's not enough. Obviously, like, this is going to be a deck that has high highs and low lows against combo. Like in the games where you go like Thoughtseize, Dothy, Voidwalker into Opposition Agent, like you're literally never going to lose. And then the games where you go like Nether Goyf into Fear of Missing Out into, I don't know, Broadside Bombardiers, you're probably going to struggle a little bit in those games. So this is a deck that can get wrong halved a little bit against the combo decks. The nice thing is that all the cards are pretty good against the rest of the metagame, regardless of what they're playing. You do have a little bit of mitigation and things like cards like Faithless Looting against getting wrong halved, but you know, if you draw all your removal spells against combo, you're going to be unhappy. But on balance, you're still pretty good against the whole metagame. I would say that the deck is best against other mid-range decks and against the aggressive decks. Black-red is a pretty natural predator for white-red also, in my opinion. I think that your cards line up pretty well into that matchup, and you get to not really care about their hate bears so much, which I think is pretty powerful, and also you get access to a little bit better removal than them. So I like black-red into the white-red matchup. Like, it's not like 70-30 or anything, but I think your favorite, like 55-45, something like that. I like it into the blue mid-range decks as well. I think you're pretty happy to play it there. And this deck is also, I think, better against green mid-range than white-red is, for example, just because you have access to a bit more disruption. Things like Opposition Agent, or things like Orcish Bowmasters let you potentially like ping off mana dorks, and you also have the capacity to grind a little bit harder, which you sometimes need to do against green. So yeah, this is red mid-range, and we're approaching the end of my list. But after this, we're going to start heading into the regions of the format that I would start to call control. Okay, we have finally hit the control end of the shell. Now, this is Trent's Jeskai mid-range list, and there's often, it's kind of a running joke in the community, like, is Jeskai a mid-range deck? Is Jeskai a control deck? I don't know. It's kind of hard to say. Certainly, historically, it's been more of a mid-range deck, but increasingly, I mean, this deck plays 16 creatures. It's hard for me to argue that it's not a control deck. It's really low on threats and is winning the game like routinely on turn 10 to 12. So I put it more on the control side of things. Certainly, if it is a mid-range deck, it is a much bigger late-game oriented mid-range deck. But this is Trent's list. He has won many QPs this year at YJ, playing Jeskai. This is his most recent update. He is playing Ancestral Recall, Fourth Earlingus, and Mystical Tutor, which I will talk about in a second. That is actually a relevant consideration. So what is Jeskai trying to do? Okay, so broadly speaking, Jeskai is taking the best counter spells, the best removal in red, the best removal in white, and coupling it together with cantrips and Ancestral Recall, and using it to grind your opponent into dust. The idea is that the answers in red and white are very powerful. Counter spells, because the rate of cards in Canadian Highlander is so variable game to game, counter spells are really premium because they almost always interact favorably if you're able to obviously be in a spot where you're able to counter the thing. Obviously, counterspell's not good against resolved threats. News at 11. But in general, counterspells are the most consistent way to approach a broad format where people are going to be doing a wide variety of things, because they don't necessarily need to line up perfectly. It doesn't matter whether it's a planeswalker or a creature or a sorcery that they're playing that is a threat. If you have a counterspell, you don't care about what type of answer you have. The counterspell counters all three of them. So that's broadly what's going on here. There are the best counter spells, there are the best removal spells, and what you are looking to do is basically trade resources early, and then eventually you're going to pull ahead with something. Historically, the something has been Ancestral Recall, and previously Merchant Scroll was recently pointed, and this deck was playing Merchant Scroll as well. It's had to cut that one, just because it was the weakest of the pointed cards that it was playing. But yeah, historically it's been Ancestral. More recently, people have been playing Fourth Lingus as well. This is a card that really closes the door quite quickly. And additionally, the addition of a card like Stock Up as well. This card is great for a deck like Jeskai that is just looking to eventually start generating 2-for-1s to win the game after it 1-for-1s you a bunch of times with its premium interaction. So I mentioned at the beginning that the point spread was slightly contentious, and I will elaborate on that now. So Ancestral Recall gets played no matter what, more or less. You can play versions of Jeskai that are reaching for Moxen instead of Ancestral Recall, but those deck lists are enough cards different from this that they are starting to get into the realm where they're like more of like a Jeskai Stoneblade style deck, typically. So I wouldn't, for me, consider those decks to be necessarily the same flavor, even though they play a lot of the same cards. So yeah, Ancestral is basically ubiquitous across these kind of Jeskai decks. And then the next 2 points, Trent for a long time played Dig Through Time as his 9th point. Instead of Fourth Lingus, and then Mystical Tutor is the 10th point that basically everyone plays. The reason why most people reach for Fourth is that it turns Mystical Tutor into this kind of absurd split card. So when you have Fourth in your deck, Mystical Tutor finds Recall if you're kind of neutral and you need to recoup cards. You can just go get Mystical, or you can go get Ancestral, and you're immediately going to pull ahead pretty quickly. If you are in a position where it's late in the game, you have 6 or 7 mana, and you just need to close the door, it goes and finds Fourth Lingus, which goes and makes 14 power and kills your opponent sometimes in 1 turn. And if you are behind on board, Mystical Tutor goes and finds Terminus. And Mystical for Terminus has been a kind of revelation in the format in the last couple of years. It's been a play that's been legal for literally more than a decade, like 15 years at this point, I think. Avacyn Restored would have been 2012, maybe 2011, right around when I started playing Magic. So the play has been available for all that time, but it's only in the last couple of years that I think we've really started to hone in on just how powerful Mystical for Terminus is, and how oppressive it can be for other creature decks. So that's why the 4th point is contentious, basically. Trent wasn't playing it for a while, and then I think he is now finally back on 4th, and I do think it's quite good. So that's the core game plan. Trade resources, eventually pull ahead with some kind of card advantage spell, and then win the game with something. To be honest, the threats in Jeskai are pretty replaceable. Like, you're just playing the best ones in the 3 colors. So like Abhorrent Oculus, Murktide Regent, Flage. These are all cards that once they get going, they're going to close the game pretty quickly. Similarly, like Pyroglyph a lot of the time in this deck is going to be killing a creature and then sitting around as a 6/7 on the board. But by and large, these games can go quite long, and this is one of the other reasons why you oftentimes need 4th, is because this threat suite is not very deep, and so if your opponent is also playing removal spells, a lot of the time they are just going to, be able to take out your creatures, and you're going to need some other way to end the game, which is where 4th is so good. The other thing that this deck is doing that's pretty, I guess, unique is it is really kind of the premier deck at playing two different types of games. So Jeskai will occasionally have these draws where they go Ragavan on turn 1, turn 2 counter your removal spell, and run you over with some kind of tempo start with like Ragavan or Tamiyo. It's not as common these days as it used to be. There used to be more aggressive cheap threats in these decks, and that's less true now. But you kind of have to prepare for both. If you are playing against Jeskai, it can be complicated because you sometimes have to look at your hand and decide, well, if they play turn 1 Tamiyo, how do I interact with it? Even though you might want to keep a hand that's more expensive, value-oriented cards, you have to make sure that you're not just going to get run over by a start like that. And so that's the other thing I think that Jeskai does that's very powerful. But this is, for me, I think this is the best starting point for if you wanted to play like a control deck in the format. This is where I would tell people to go. Jeskai is a deck that you can basically play whenever. Like it's never bad. This is the deck that is at this point, I think, the kind of meta police. This is the deck where, you know, if you're showing up with a random brew and you play against Jeskai, you're probably not that happy a lot of the time. It's just going to have an interaction for almost everything that's going on. Jeskai is not good into a metagame full of combo. As you heard me say in the deck text for all the combo decks, they all kind of want to be playing against these Jeskai decks. And the reason for that is that while the Jeskai decks do have a bunch of counterspells, like, you know, 10 or 12, I think, a decent number, you can play through those as the combo decks, and Jeskai struggles to put pressure onto the combo decks. So a lot of the times, if you're playing combo, you get the opportunity to jam your combo, maybe with protection, and then before Jeskai can even put enough pressure on you to potentially end the game, you get to like refire and try again. So that's definitely like the metagame where I would maybe not advocate bringing Jeskai quite as strongly. Just in the oops, all combo decks metagame, I think it's a little bit worse. But in general, this is a deck that you can pretty happily play into most metas. Okay, we have come to the end. This is the last deck in the video. This is Dark Jeskai Control. This is a deck list that has really a lot of names. Some people call this Jeskai Black, 4-color, no green control. There's a lot of ways to refer to this. So this is going to look very familiar to, or very similar to the Jeskai list that we just looked at. It's just the same thing plus the black cards, the good black cards, basically. So it's doing a lot of the same things that Jeskai is trying to do. This deck is playing all of the premium interaction in the four colors that it's playing. And so you get access to like swords, lightning bolt, unholy heat, these kinds of things. But then because you're playing black, you also get access to a couple more cards that are intended to kind of shore up some of the matchups that are challenging for Jeskai. So in addition to like Fatal Push, which is just another reasonable removal spell, you get access to like Cling to Dust, which is a good card against some of the combo decks. You have Thoughtseize, Inquisition, Duress to, again, help you with combo. Similarly, you get Opposition Agent and Orcish Spellmasters. Again, these are cards that are supposed to help you against the combo matchups. The trade-off that you pay for playing 4 colors, and really we are playing like the actual factual 4 colors, right? Like this is a deck that's trying to cast Orcish Bowmasters and Aragorn on curve. It's got a red, white spell in it. In addition to like, you know, double white spells. Obviously, we're not trying to cast any double black spells, but we're trying to cast double blue, double white, and double red while also casting black spells. So, your mana base is strained. This is the list from the Canadian Highlander database. It's well maintained. These people clearly think about this mana base quite a lot. And as you can see, like we're on 37 lands if you include the MDFC. And despite playing 37 lands, we get 1 basic. And it's this island. We do have this Mystic Sanctuary in Ottawa, which I'm surprised that there's enough space to play. But so one of the things that this deck can run into problems-wise is that if you're playing against, the Blood Moon decks or the Price of Progress decks or the lands decks that are doing like Wasteland lock things, you can certainly run into issues where your mana base is going to betray you. That being said, when this deck gets to cast its spells, it feels stone unbeatable. If you've had the misfortune, or the fortune, I guess, of playing this deck, you know that when you just get to curve like cantrip into properly lined up answer into discard spell plus hold up counter spell, or discard spell plus develop a threat or a baleful strix or whatever, like this deck just feels like it can never lose when you draw the right half of it, especially. So the power level here is really, really, really high. And you can interact with everything. You have answers to everything. The cost of your setup, though, is your mana base is a lot worse. This is actually, it's interesting, the 4-color kind of blue control deck, this deck is worse against something like, say, Mono Red or the Boros Death and Taxes deck than I think regular Jeskai would be. Those are the places you're giving up points. But this black-based Jeskai deck is particularly good and was kind of built in some ways, I think, to challenge Jeskai. So if you are playing Jeskai and your opponent is playing Jeskai Black, well, now they just have like more high impact cards in the matchup, and I think you're going to have a hard time with that. Other than that, this deck is doing mostly the same things as Jeskai. Like I said, the crossover for the cards is pretty significant. There's a lot of crossover. Invert Polarity is a card that we also saw in the Jeskai list. This is a card that can sometimes feel like it basically just coin flips to win the game. If you get to counter their 3-drop with Invert Polarity and you steal it, it's really, really difficult a lot of the time to come back, especially in a deck like this where you can then just start protecting it with your counter spells, and you get to have developed a threat that way. So yeah, Jeskai Black is the preeminent control deck, and it's interesting. You're probably wondering, well, what about blue-white control or blue-red control? And these are decks that used to be played in the format that just aren't playable in the current metagame. I wouldn't feel comfortable representing them as metagame staples or as parts of the metagame where we think they're very stock. Those decks are pretty hard to play, and decks like this are exactly why. If you're registering blue-white control and your opponent is, you know, curving out with creatures of this quality while still playing the same premium interaction that you're playing, it's just really challenging to win those games. Points-wise, this deck is doing the exact same thing as the Jeskai deck I showed. So it's mystical, it's ancestral, it's 4th. This deck, I think, wants to draw ancestral even worse than the Jeskai deck does. Particularly, you just have so many 1-mana interactive spells and cantrips that being able to get ahead on cards is really, really important. And this deck is definitely similarly good at doing so. Yeah, this deck also just gets access to like things like Leyline Binding, which is cool, evasive action, like these domain cards, because your 4-color are all of a sudden become viable to play, which is pretty neat. I think you would reach for this deck when your metagame is full of blue midrange. So if people are playing Jeskai or Grixis, or I guess to a lesser extent Bug, that deck is not super popular. But if you're seeing a lot of 3-color blue midrange, this deck is very good against those decks. It's good against like the blue-red tempo, blue-black tempos of the world. This deck is going to be pretty strong into those matchups. You would want to not play this deck into, again, really combo-dominated metagames. I think that the counters or the discard spells make those matchups better, but I don't know that it makes it enough better that I would want to be playing that matchup like 2 or 3 times a night, potentially. And similarly, if your metagame is like weirdly aggressive with lots of Blood Moons running around, you maybe want to shy away from playing this, and you maybe go down to playing one of the 3-color blue midrange decks instead, just because, yeah, your mana base is prone to getting Blood Mooned, let's just say. But yeah. So without further ado, this is 4-color control. You will also see people sometimes play this same shell, same thing with Ancestral and Mystical Tutor, except instead of playing red, they will play green. So you'll see people playing like these Esper Green deck lists. They're similar. I decided not to include one because there's enough crossover that it felt like it would be kind of like showing the same kind of deck list. But essentially those decks are cutting all of the red cards and the red interaction to instead get to play cards like Oko and Uro, which are obviously very premium mid-range threats. Those decks for me tend to skew slightly more mid-rangey, but just because they give up some of the red interaction. But they're very powerful as well. and they're doing similar things. They're trying to go over the top. In terms of which one is better, like whether you would want to be no green versus no red in like a mirror match, my read is that you would want to be on the no red version rather than no green. So maybe if you are playing against a lot of 4-color control, that's the direction you want to go. But yeah, deck is very sweet. Deck is very powerful, and I would highly recommend it if you are someone who really likes managing your mana base and feeling totally in control once you kind of have your mana base locked down and you've survived the first couple of turns. So that's it. I ended up with 10 decks. I think I added one last minute, but I hope you enjoyed this kind of snapshot into the Canadian Highlander meta. Obviously, Canadian Highlander is a very complicated format with a lot of decks that you can build. So if you want to see more videos like this, if you want me to review maybe decks that are more on the fringes but that you might see, I'm more than happy to do this kind of style of long form deck tech. Deck teching is one of my favorite things to do, obviously, as as we've maybe noticed. But I think it'll be good for us to have these deck techs to reach back to, and if you're maybe trying to get a friend into the format or something like that, you can send them this video, send them the timestamp of the deck that you think kind of best suits what they might like to do, and it's a good opportunity to kind of showcase that. So comment below, let me know what other decks you might want to see in a video like this. If I've gotten anything wrong, obviously, like, I'm not an expert on every single deck that I've showcased. There are definitely people who have played a lot more of many of these archetypes, and I'm more than happy to defer to the people who have lots of experience in those areas. But without further ado, I hope you enjoyed the video, and I'll see you next time.